And not that I'm going to teach school. I know some of you fear that at times when I get up here because you think I have like flashbacks to my teaching days. But Jane just read about crossing the River Jordan, and I've heard a lot of stories about that. And one of the things is, oh, well, they crossed the Jordan like we go down here and cross Dorsey Run. Well, I can tell you what, depending on where you cross Dorsey Run, even though it's not wide, it could easily be up to your chest, and at this time of year it could be a little chilly and cold. I want you to look here, but this is where he crossed, and it's a 13-mile trek. Folks, the Bay Bridge isn't even close to 13 miles. That is a long trek, and when it says that God went before them, this is what we're going to talk about a little bit for today. Because this whole idea of crossing over is kind of what got me when it talked about it. The first thing I thought about was, well, tomorrow's Halloween. And unfortunately, said Halloween has a mixed event in the church. It has become such that we realized that maybe the church got tied up in some things in pursuing the occult part of Halloween. And you'll find a jack-o'-lantern on my front porch. I'm not worshiping the occult. But there is some concern about this acknowledgement of witches and going that if the church is condoning that, then, maybe there's something to be said about supporting that. All right, so my thought was of this crossing over thing, and I thought, tomorrow, there's probably going to be, unfortunately, a lot of kids and adults participating in some seance-like activity, thinking it's fun. And they're going to be wanting to talk to folks who are crossing over. They want to get to those folks who are somewhere between earth and heaven, or earth and hell, or heaven and hell, whatever it is. And in reality, the question has come up in the last couple of weeks. And for those of you who know Marvin, he has lots of questions. Marvin loves to ask questions, and he's not afraid to ask them. And one he asked me almost 2 weeks ago now, when we were facing this situation, and it actually became a great discussion in our house, or my dad's house in the last week, and it was, when does the soul leave the body? And I looked at him and I went, okay, here we go. If I could answer that, I'd probably have my name on some books in a whole lot of stores here in the area. And, and they'd mention me with Augustus and Wesley and Luther and some of those folks, and trust me, that's probably not going to happen. But the one thing that we are assured of in Scripture is there isn't this any in between. That life on this earth becomes life in heaven, or life at rest simultaneously. That we literally transfer from one to the other. So this idea of the seance, the crossing over, there's really not a break. Well, how do you explain then, and we talked about this also, how do you explain that out-of-body experience? When we know for a fact, there's a couple of great movies out there now where the person's looking down and they see themselves, or whatever. I'd love to tell you I had an answer for it. Because I know that I wouldn't have to worry about how I was going to finish paying off the college or pay for the next wedding. Because I'd have lots of book sales. Wouldn't be a problem. But what we are guaranteed is that in God, in His wisdom, in His mystery, and in His unique way, will take us from this world seamlessly right to the next. Without a problem. So in thinking about this crossing over and this seance thing, that people are going to be scared tomorrow night, and they're going to be excited, and they're going to be doing all that, and they'll probably be doing a lot of things other than being godly, is the unfortunate part. But today, the crossing over I want to talk about is that crossing over that Jane read about. And she says it's pretty amazing. And if you're not an Old Testament guy or gal, I will tell you that Joshua is a good place to start reading, I think. There are some of my favorite scriptures come from that. I was going to bring my coffee cup this morning that Ashley made for me, and it has a scripture from Joshua 1 on it. And it's in Joshua where God says that He has all these plans for us. And Joshua is where we learn as Joshua to trust in God, and that God's going to be there. And this is what we're talking about for today. Today we actually read about crossing the river. Well, that in and of itself was pretty daggum amazing. When you think about this, you have to understand what was really happening. And what was happening was this, is Moses was stepping down. God had decided it was time for Moses to finish up, and he needed to have a new leader. And as he takes us from the living in this world through the dead to the living in eternity, he wanted this to be seamless. He wanted it to be easy. But you know, I don't know about you, but every time you get a new boss or you get a new president or a new senator or something, there's a little period of time where you want them to prove themselves. You know, you're not really sure. And Joshua knew that he was getting into this because Moses wasn't going to get to go to the promised land. Remember, Moses had his issues and God said, you will take them, but you'll get there. And then Moses died before he got to go there. Of course, he was 100 and some years old or something. I forget how many now off the top of my head. But so here is where we are. Joshua is going to become a new leader. He's got to get them across 13 miles of the river during the spring after the snow melt. The river is at its highest. I don't know about you, but I'd rather do that with someone I've trusted for a long time like Moses. So this is what God does. He says, I'm going to make you a great leader. And this is how I want you to do it. Even though you're a regular, everyday guy, this is what I want you to do. And he says in Scripture, I want you to pick 12 people out. And I want them to carry the Ark of the Covenant. Now you had to understand that they believed God was actually in that Ark of the Covenant. They didn't understand that God was everywhere. You know, it was like Moses went to the mountain and God was in the bush. Well, then they built the Ark of the Covenant and God's in the Ark. And then they take the Ark of the Temple and God's kind of there. And it hadn't dawned on them that, did you get it, that God's everywhere? That God is all around. Omnipresent, as we say theologically. All right? So he's going there and he's taking him there and he wants people to trust Joshua. So he says, pick them. Not just the 12 Levites, not just the Levites, because the tribe of Levi was the one who always took care of the ark. Pick 12 high priests. So all of a sudden people are going, whoa, this is a big deal. We're not doing this the way we normally do. And he said, you tell them to go down to the river, and when they place their feet in the edge of the water will separate. And they went down and they carried it. And he said, but you make sure that the Ark of the Covenant goes before them. He said, because I don't want them to think that they did it or you did it on your own. Ark of the Covenant goes out into the river. It had to stay in front of them until everybody went through. And believe it or not, this crossing was not in a few minutes. It was in 2 to 3 days. There were actually camps in the riverbed to get them across. 13 miles of walking is a long ways to go. In sandals or your bare feet. I mean, they didn't have a nice pair of Rocky boots to go. So when you look at this text, it said Wesley wrote some notes about it, and he says, starting at verse 8, he says, on the brink. So right on the brink is the Hebrew for extremity, so far as the river spread itself. He said, it was within the waters of the Jordan, in the first entrance into the river, where they stood for a season, a while, till the river was divided. And then they went into the midst of it. And then in Wesley's words, in verse 9, it was come hither, the ark of the tabernacle, the place of public assemblies. That's what went out. All right? And he wanted that because it was he wanted people to understand, God wanted them to understand that He was in control of everything. And then Wesley wrote, he says, by experience and sensible the evidence, the living God, not a dull, dead, and senseless God, such as the gods of the nations are, but a God of life, a God of power and activity to watch over you and work for you among you, is present with you to strengthen and help you. Wow. In the Old Testament, there was a living God. So we like to talk about that in the New, but here was Joshua talking about this. Then in verse 12, he talks about the ark of the Lord, and this is where he told him. He said, this is where I want it to appear that this is the Lord's doing, and not in pursuance of His covenant that was made with Israel of all the earth, but of all the earth. He wanted them to know that He was the God of all the earth. Now, this was big news. Because in the Old Testament, God was God of the Hebrews. And this is this first understanding of this is a God for everybody. Remember, that's what Jesus got in trouble for, because he upset the Jews because he said, well, the Gentiles can come to God too. And they went, no, you got to be kidding me. Not the Gentiles. Not the Samaritans. We're not having those people in our group. Unfortunately, that's what the church did for many years, and maybe that's where the church is having its troubles now, is because we had said, we're not having those people in our church. And we missed the story of Joshua, where early on, God was trying to say that he is Lord of the globe of earth and water, and therefore can dispose of this river and the adjoining land if he pleases. He can cut it off. The waters which are now united shall be divided, and part shall flow down the channel and out to the Dead Sea. And the other part that's nearer the spring is going to back up in a heap, as if it was being congealed as the Red Sea. God was tying all this together, because if you go to Exodus in chapter 15 and into verse 8, you will find similar stories about the Red Sea. So, Moses carried the people through the Red Sea. Joshua now gets them across the Jordan. Where was Jesus baptized? In the Jordan. God doesn't do anything by accident. All of these plans, he used water, and he was convincing the Jews, who were very educated, traditional, and understanding their history, look at what I've done. It is seamless. We are crossing over without an issue. Not a one. One of the other commentaries, and I didn't know this fellow, but he had some nice writings online. His name's Wayne Turner. And he says, when the priests are told that they will lead the troops by 3/5 of a mile with the ark and the covenant in hand, I'm guessing that they were looking for a sign. And well, they got it. When the priests arrived at the edge of the Jordan, it dries up right before their very eyes. And even though it was the rainy time of year, the banks of the Jordan were the brim, the troops go across the dry land. So far, so good. He said, Jericho, here we come. The mission of the 12 men chosen in verse 12 is then seen at the beginning of chapter 4. It goes on, the Jordan dries up. Now these men actually had to carry this ark, and they had to get their feet in the water. That was the beginning when Jane read. And when they got their feet in the water, and if the water's up to the bank, now I'm assuming they weren't too deep, but I'm guessing the Jordan's running pretty good, and they can feel it. Okay, we're now stepping in. The first guy gets in, next guy, and they got to wait for the last guy to get his feet in before the river starts to dry up. Talk about faith. That's the crossing over part. The crossing over was the faith to trust that God will take them to the next spot. That's what God is telling us. He's telling us that we're crossing over. Yeah, we're crossing over. Not Halloween style. And even though at some point soon relatively, all of us will cross over from this life into the next. Hopefully right this minute, no one's in the process of doing that. This is not a seance, and we're not sitting around and trying to get people to cross over, but we are all crossing over something in this life. We are all at some point. In this past week, I will share a quick story. I met with a young man at Dorsey Church, and it's just an amazing experience when God takes you, and not that I'm Joshua or anyone else, but when He allows you and you allow yourself to be used in service and see the things that begin to happen. Well, Joshua was beginning to see it. Can you imagine, Joshua is trusting God, sends these people down and watches the river dry, and he's looking at it and going, oh my gosh, God just used me to do that. That's what's happening in each of your lives. Well, this young man comes to me, and we go to have something to eat, and he tells me when we're having something to eat, we know he's had some problems in his life. He says, I'm ready to go take a next step in his life. Meaning he's going to have to go attend some meetings. He's going to have to go make a major change in his lifestyle. And he's a young man, and he looks at me, and he says, and we've been talking about this for months. And all of a sudden he looks at me, he goes, I'm ready. How do I do it? I've never taken anybody to a program before. But I know I've got a whole bunch of folks, I've got several folks in the other church who have. And we prayed together, and I pick up the phone when I get home, or I went to Facebook, and I sent a message to one of the guys I know, and as of last night, as far as I know, I think the young man made his first phone call. Crossing over. He's crossing over. I'm crossing over. All of us, as a church, as every, these things are happening right in the middle of us. And this is what he's saying. He said, the leaders are us. God's saying He's calling us to either make our crossover, to get our feet in the water and allow Him to separate. Now, can you imagine this water piled up on this side? And the water on this side, it's still running. Everything in life is going full speed in that direction, and everything in life on this side of you is stopped because you're crossing over. You're making a change. Something in your life is making a change. In the past couple of weeks, we talked about a fresh start. In September, we started with going to back to school, making a fresh start, and all the things there. And then we went into the movie, the Courageous. So we talked about what it meant to be courageous. And last week, we got down to the point of actually stepping up and announcing, who do we say the Messiah is? These are steps in our faith walk where we are always crossing over. And today we look at where we are. So are we the Levites who would normally carry that ark? We're sort of leaders, but we're there. Or are we the people who would just follow? So are we the chosen 12 of the high priest that are going to get to carry it out into the water? You know, are we any one of those? Are we somewhere in between? So what I'm going to tell you is that part doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which role that you have, because each one of them was crossing over. Each one of them was in a new role. Now the high priest had carried the ark, but they had never carried it in the middle of the river before. The Levites had followed, but they'd never followed in the middle of a river before. And they'd never gone with Joshua, they'd always gone with Moses. And what about all those other folks? The parishioners. They looked at Joshua and looked at God and said, God is going before us, and with God, all things are possible. No matter what it was. They traveled over 13 miles of water, piling up on one side, running on the other. That stuff running on the other side, that's the stuff in our life, running away. The stuff piled up on this side, that's the stuff in our life that we've got to pile up and we've got to separate and set aside so we can find the riverbed to cross over and be in ministry and in relationship with Jesus Christ. So what is your river? Fear of parenting? The fear of being Christian in a non-Christian world? Is it the fear of finance? Is it the fear of alcohol, drugs, depression, marriage? Is it the fear of peer pressure in school? Because everybody says everybody's doing it. So just because you're 10 or 12 doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing it too. In fact, if you want to be an adult, then come on, step up and do it. You want to be a man, then treat a woman this way. You want to be a woman, give a man what he wants. And yet God's saying, no. He's saying, pile that stuff up on this side. Let it run on that side. Allow me to put your feet in the trouble. Allow me to put your feet in the middle of unemployment. Allow me to put your feet in the middle of old age. Allow me to put your feet in the middle of a hospice center. And follow me through it. God's calling each and every one of us to be the next Joshua. He's not just calling us to get in the river and follow. He's calling us to show other people. He wants us to be Joshua. He wants us not just to be here on Sunday as an observer, but He wants us to be here as a Christian a leader by living our lives as the body of Christ. And guess what? That means change. That meant change for Joshua. He all of a sudden went from just a guy who was one of Moses' right-hand men to the leader. For those who carry the ark, for those who walk through everything, life was never the same again. And it was better because they ended up in the promised land. That's going to mean in doing things you never thought that you would ever do, and it's going to mean stopping things that you never thought that you'd ever stop. So this Halloween and this week, cross over. But don't cross over in a seance. Cross over in the River Jordan. Put Christ out in front of your life. Go put your feet in the water. Wait for it to separate and say, where you lead, I will follow.